Kathleen Olive, and welcome to Limelight Arts Travel's podcast, Talking Travel. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, Italy was the fifth most visited tourist destination in the world, with travel and tourism making up a whopping 13.3% of GDP. Many of us remember how, in the early days of the pandemic, familiar Italian cities, usually thronging with crowds, emptied out, from dolphins in Venetian canals to grass growing in the Baroque squares of Rome. Now that international travel is returning, Italy is reclaiming its position among travellers, with Rome the second most desirable destination for Americans in 2022, for example. Today I'm speaking with Emanuele Attanasio about Italy's tourism recovery, about how cultural travellers can still find authentic experiences there, and how we can contribute to a more sustainable reboot of the industry. Emanuele was educated between Australia and Italy and has specialist qualifications in tourism and business management. He is the manager of the Italian National Tourist Board's Australia and New Zealand operations, connecting travellers from Australia and New Zealand with all that Italy has to offer for close to 20 years now. From the beaches of the Italian south to skiing in the mountains and the cultural riches of Italy's cities and towns, Emanuele is across it all, and it's a pleasure to speak with him today. Emanuele Attanasio, thank you very much for joining us in conversation today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. So it's not very often that we hear in Australia an Italian speaking with a very strong Australian accent. So what's your connection to the two countries?
Yeah, so mine's a bit of a particular story because I have an Australian accent because I came to Australia at the age of 3. I was born in Milano. And so I did all my primary school years in Australia until I was about 12. And then when I was 12, my mum and dad decided that they didn't really want to live in Australia, that they wanted to go back to Italy. And because my mum is from Tuscany, they decided to move the family to Lucca, to Tuscany. And that's where I grew up. And I did all my high school years there. And then when I was a young adult, at the age of about 22, 23, I kind of wanted to go back and see the places that I vaguely remembered as a child. Because when you're a child, you pretty much just go to school and you come home. You don't really have a lot of experience in traveling around Australia or whatever. So I wanted to do that, and I came back in the early 90s, and so therefore I've kind of always grown up bilingual. And one thing that it's compulsory to do in Italy is to actually learn languages at school. So when I was in high school, I learned German, French, and English. And because I could already speak English, I kind of always maintained that. And now because I work at the tourist board, I speak Italian all day at work. So I've kind of always grown up knowing two languages.
Yeah, it's a real boon. And as you said, you're at the Italian Tourist Board now, so you've been with ENIT almost 20 years now. What's your role with ENIT?
Yeah, so I manage the Tourist Board for Australia and New Zealand. So our office in Sydney looks after both countries.
It's a big market, I think, Australia and New Zealand for Italy. Cultural travellers in Australia seem to really love Italy and return again and again. How does ENIT see our market?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important market, not just because of the numbers, and the numbers have always, besides the last 2 years, obviously, which we're not even going to talk about, but besides the numbers always being quite high, because Italy is actually the number one European tourism destination for Australians. It's also the quality of the traveller. Australians don't just go to Italy and spend a weekend there, like my colleagues in the German office or Switzerland or the UK. We go there and from Australia, and we spend 4 to 6 weeks there. So we spend money and we spend time, and Australians are really appreciative of all the things that we don't have here, like the art cities and the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So there's a real appreciation for all things Italian, and therefore I think it's a very, very important market.
What's ENIT's mission in Australia and in other places, maybe for people who are listening who aren't familiar with the Italian National Tourist Board?
Yeah, so the Italian National Tourist Board was actually founded over 100 years ago in 1919. And it's called ENIT because it's Ente Nazionale Italiano per l'Incremento delle Industrie Turistiche. So that's what it stands for. But in Australia, we're known as the Italian National Tourist Board. So if you say ENIT, not many people probably know. Our mission is to promote Italy as a tourism destination. Using a corporate strategy that's actually made in Italy and implemented through local offices and partnerships with the embassies, the cultural institutes, the trade agencies, the chambers of commerce. We have 28 offices all around the world. And in the coming years, Italy's tourism development will be sort of more focused on value growth. So not just numbers, but also the value of the tourists. So having a more sustainable approach and things like that.
That's really interesting. I mean, in such a long history, the Italian National Tourist Board must have had an opportunity to really work on its strategies and work on its structures. Is it one of the earliest European national tourist boards? 1919.
Before the war. So,
yeah.
And I think it's one of the first tourist boards, and it's really interesting because we actually have these archives as well in our head office in Rome, and you can see the historic posters of how they used to promote tourism, and there's all these beautiful, really historic posters. And if you're curious about that, there's a website which you can actually go on to, I can't even remember. I'll have to get back to you with the actual.
Yeah, we'll link it. Yeah,
link it. But you can see the historic archives, which we've now put online.
Oh, fabulous!
It's called a virtual museum, Museo Virtuale, I think it's called .com or something like that. But I'll give you the link.
Yeah, we'll definitely link in the blog piece, because I'm sure people who've travelled in Italy have seen those amazing tourist posters and the official tourist posters for various destinations in Italy. They're such a fabulous part of the whole Italian design ethic. You said we weren't going to talk about it, but we kind of do have to talk about COVID. I mean, you commented that Italy had been a top European destination for cultural travellers in particular, I think, and we can talk about the reasons why. But how do you see the situation pre-COVID and post-COVID? There's so much talk about a reset. How is Italy faring at the moment with tourism?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's given us a chance to kind of sort of take a step back and look at what we were doing and how we can improve things. And there was always talk about over tourism in certain places, in Italy, like in the art cities. And I think it's kind of our job to sort of promote the lesser known destinations as well, because obviously you have the major cities that perhaps first time travelers go to first, like Venice, Florence, and Rome. But I think travelers, once they realize that there's so much more to see and do in Italy than those art cities. You've got in the north the Lakes District, the Dolomites, and then sort of heading more towards the centre, regions that perhaps maybe people don't know about, like Emilia Romagna and Liguria, Umbria, and also in the south, the islands, Sicily and Sardinia. So I think it's important to sort of promote Italy, even in different seasons as well. So, I've been to even recently to in the last few years to the hotspots that have over tourism in other times of the year, and there's literally been nobody around. I remember taking my in-laws to the Cinque Terre, and I'd been there a few years earlier in the summertime, and it was pretty crowded, hard to get around, and I had pre-warned them. I said, if you really want to go there, I'll take you there. It's going to be a little bit busy. And it was December. It was actually January. Beautiful day, sunshine was out, and there was nobody around, literally nobody around.
Yeah.
No crowds at all.
Magic.
So I think it's a good opportunity to sort of show a different angle of Italy.
So how do you think we get the word out then about these places in Italy that perhaps, people who've been to Italy once, as you've said, they've been to Venice, Florence, Rome, maybe the Cinque Terre, maybe Puglia for a farmhouse stay. But how do you think we get the word out about some of those lesser known destinations? What does the Italian National Tourist Board see as a way forward there?
Well, there's a lot of initiatives as well that we try and sort of tap into. For example, the Italian capital of culture, for example, that's a big one. So in 2022, Procida, which is an island in the south, was the Italian capital of culture. In 2023, it's actually going to be Bergamo and Brescia. So just by, I guess, raising awareness and nominating these places as capitals of culture, that's one way to do it as well. We've got things like the Winter Olympic Games, which are going to be held in Cortina in 2026. I guess it's up to us to sort of, even with the travel writers and for them to go there and have these experiences and come back and write about all these fantastic stories as well.
Yeah, just get the word out a little bit more about all of the riches that lie a little bit off the tourist path and get a few more people there. You talked about something that is a word you taught me, which I will attempt to say in Italian, but I don't know about this. Destagionalizzazione. Deseasonalization.
Yeah, you said that very well.
Thank you. Deseasonalization. How do we encourage more tourism to Italy, more travel to Italy that is out of season? So how do we get around the fact that, we have our holidays when we have our holidays? How do we get around the fact that people like the weather of certain seasons?
Well, I think that's also another reason why Australian tourism is very, very important as well, because we don't really have that issue here. We take holidays in Australia when we want to take them. We're entitled to 4 weeks annual leave, and we just tell our bosses when we want to go. Obviously school holidays has a big part in that as well. So that's another reason why I think we're so important. Whereas in other countries, they sort of all take their holidays around the same time of year, June, July, August. And so that's a big factor as well. And that's what I always tell our directors as well. It's like, Australians is we're the perfect tourists. We're very appreciative. We spend a lot of money, and we don't all go in June, July, August. So I think that's a big one as well. And also, things like heritage and roots tourism as well is a big. I think is very important. So there's a lot of, obviously Italians, people with Italian backgrounds in Australia who perhaps want to go back and visit the places where, their ancestors came from, and chances are that they're probably from small villages or, places that are off the beaten track, and that's another, I think, way of exploring Italy as well. So maybe perhaps landing in the major cities, but then going off the beaten track and maybe getting a train to a village that perhaps people wouldn't normally go to.
What are some of the benefits of travelling that way? You've mentioned, obviously, with your experience in the Cinque Terre, that you encountered far fewer people, so that's one big benefit. What are some of the other benefits of going to the lesser known places?
Well, you get to really experience the authentic Italy, I think, and the thing about Italy is that it is divided into 20 unique regions. And when I say unique, I really mean that, because they differ so much from one region to another. So by going to a location that's a little bit off the beaten path, you really get to experience things like a different type of cuisine as well. So, I'm from Lucca, for example, and the typical dessert that we have in Lucca is something that's called bucellato. Now, bucellato, you can only get it if you travel 20 kilometers away and you go to Pisa and you ask for bucellato, you won't get it.
Yeah.
You can only get it in Lucca, and that's just one example. And I'm sure that there are very many other examples that I'm not even aware of, where if you go a little bit off the beaten path to the lesser known destinations, you probably really experience the authentic authentic Italy of that location.
This is something I've noticed with Italians on holiday within Italy as well, is that they really appreciate searching out the local food, the local customs, that they're so immersed in their own history and their own traditions. What are some of the benefits to the people in those off the beaten track destinations if more of us spend time in those places? What benefits do they reap from that?
Yeah, they get to obviously welcome people from all all walks of life, and people from all different parts of the world that perhaps maybe they wouldn't get to encounter. They get to show all the things that they produce, whether it be wine or olive oil, or even places like trattorie, if anyone doesn't know what they are, they're typical restaurants, but not fancy restaurants. It's restaurants that have been around for generations. Perhaps they only have 5 or 6 or 7 things on the menu, but typical quality cuisine that's probably family run, and that you won't experience anywhere else. So for the locals, they get to showcase their local products.
Do we need to modify any of our expectations when we go off the beaten path? Do we need to think differently about accommodation, or do we need to think about who'll speak English, whether we'll be able to make ourselves understood? Are there any challenges for us as cultural travellers?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to a hamlet or a village and expect to stay in a 5-star Hilton hotel, you're going to be very disappointed, because you're not going to get that. You'll probably get that in a major city. And as well as getting to certain places, there are, as a general rule, Italy is very well connected on the rail network. You can pretty much get on a high-speed train and go anywhere, like into any major city, and then once you get to that major city, you can then get on a local train, and also it's very, very well connected. But there are other areas that perhaps you need to hire a car, or that's not as well connected. So I guess to answer your question, expectations change obviously from a major city to a small village.
Yeah. But there's benefits, some rewards to us for feeling a little less comfortable. What about seasonal changes? So we've talked about smaller places and the benefits to visiting those. But if we were to head to larger Italian cities out of the usual high tourist season, is the major benefit, do you think, still the fact that we'll encounter fewer people, or are there other benefits to visiting Italy, say, in the winter?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a personal choice. I love Italy in the wintertime. In fact, the last 2 trips that I went with my family, one was during the summer and the other one was during the winter time. And they always tell me that they much prefer the winter, because, I don't know, I think that maybe it's also because I think it's also a factor of going to somewhere that we don't really have here in Australia. So we don't really have things like Christmas markets and things like that. So my family really enjoyed places like Bolzano and the Christmas markets up there, and all the things that we don't have here pretty much.
Yeah, I suppose it's also a time of year for lots of local celebrations and religious processions and those kind of authentic experiences that we really don't have here. I have really strong memories of the times I've been in Florence on the 6th of January, which is Epiphany, because you get the big Befana procession in Florence with real camels, taking the wise men to baby Jesus, and then you get the good, or well, let's call her a good witch, bringing the Christmas presents for the kids. So it's a totally different kind of experience in some ways.
And the burning of the witch. So I was in Verona on the 6th of January a few years ago, and they were burning the witch just outside the arena of Verona. It was a great event. It was everyone had their phones out taking photos and.
Fabulous. Yeah. It's a great way to feel like you're a bit more of the fabric of a place, I think, when you're not fighting off all of the other tourists. What does Ennet see with the Italian National Tourist Board's very long history of developing strategies and fostering cultural tourism and all forms of travel in Italy? What does it see in its crystal ball post-COVID? Now that everyone's flocking back to Italy, where are they going?
Well, as I mentioned, we've got these cultural events coming up. So Bergamo and Brescia being, the Italian capitals of culture, the Winter Olympic Games in Cortina in 2026, and the Ryder Cup next year. The Ryder Cup, for anyone that's a fan of golf, will be held in Rome in 2023. So they're big events that we're sort of focusing on. Our focus is to promote the whole country, really, not just the major cities, even things like the islands and the Amalfi Coast and the art cities. I mean, we have 58 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Italy, which is more than any other country in the world. So if you can imagine how small Italy is as a country, having that many UNESCO World Heritage Sites is a big achievement.
That's a great tip, would be to look at and include one UNESCO World Heritage Site on every trip to Italy that you did, because pretty much wherever you are in the country, you're guaranteed to find one.
You can't take a bad photo in Italy, that's what I always say.
No bad photo, no bad coffee.
Exactly.
Neither of those things exist. What about your personal crystal ball? Where would, if we could send you to anywhere in Italy that you wanted to go right now, where would you always want to return?
Well, I'd always want to return to Lucca, which is actually where I'm from, and that's where I grew up. And it's also, I say that as well because every time I go back, nothing's changed. It's like it's stood still in time. So I love that aspect of me, going back and just, nothing's changed. But I'd also love to go to somewhere that I haven't been before. And on my bucket list, I've got Matera, which unfortunately I've never been to. Ever since watching that James Bond movie, it's kind of really made me want to go. So I think one of my next trips, I think I'm going to include Matera.
Tell us a little bit more about Matera for the people listening who don't know where it is and what makes it so unique.
It's in a region called Basilicata, which is in the south, and it's famous for the Sassi di Matera. So it's these basically constructions and houses built in a rock, inside of a rock, and it was for many years it was kind of forgotten about, even by Italians themselves, and it's only been in the last, I think, 10-20 years that we sort of rediscovered it and really shown how beautiful it actually is. And if you haven't seen the first scene of that James Bond movie, I encourage you to watch that, and you definitely want to go and visit Matera.
Absolutely. I think it's Die Another Day, is it? Is it that one? Or No Time to Die. No Time to Die. They all have such similar titles.
That's
Time to
one.
Die. Very dramatic opening scene in that film. And maybe let's end then where we started, which was Lucca. Aside from the fact that it's such an eternal presence in your life, and when you return it hasn't changed, what else is it about Lucca that makes that such a wonderful destination?
Well, Lucca is a town that's circondata. How can you say that in English? It's surrounded by medieval walls. So it's and they're unique. You've got a lot of towns in Italy that are surrounded by walls because once upon a time they used to fight. Each town would fight against each other, so they'd enclose themselves in the walls. But the walls of Lucca are unique because you can actually walk on them. So they're like a promenade, and you can actually just, go and get a gelato and just stroll along the walls of Lucca, and that's why they're famous. It's also the city of 100 churches. It actually, even though it's a very, very, well, it's not that small, but it's relatively small city. It has 100 churches in Lucca, which I think is absolutely fascinating as well. And it's kind of a city that's sort of, because it's in Tuscany, it kind of often gets forgotten about because people that head to Tuscany, they head straight to Florence, and then they want to see the Leaning Tower of Pisa and perhaps go to Siena, and it maybe sometimes gets forgotten about, and it's just as beautiful as those cities that I mentioned as well. So,
and very elegant. I think it has a really elegant character, quite a distinct character, quite a distinct personality, I think, as a little Tuscan town. You made me very excited about it because I'm taking a group there in January, and we're spending 3 nights in Lucca in January. So you've made me really excited about these off-season experiences that we'll have. Thank you so much for your time, Emanuele.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Limelight Arts Travels podcast, Talking Travel. It was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land and their elders past and present.